The Compliance Bureau. Ambassador Kalen Vross stood before the obsidian monolith that served as the entrance to the Terran delegation headquarters. His crystalline exoskeleton reflected the pale light of Earth's sun, a star he'd studied in academy texts but never imagined visiting. As High Adjudicator of the Harmonious Collective's third quadrant, he governed 217 worlds with absolute precision. Now he'd been sent to oversee humanity's integration into the galactic order. The collective had ruled for 12,000 years, administering justice to 1 million inhabited systems through the sacred principle of total compliance. Every citizen knew their place. Every regulation was followed without question. The alternative, chaos, war, extinction, had been eliminated through perfect bureaucratic harmony. Ambassador Vross, said the human who greeted him at the door. She wore casual clothing, denim and cotton, violations of formal diplomatic protocol. I'm Dr. Sienna Cross, Earth's liaison officer. Welcome to our little planet. Kalen's translator chip processed the words, but something felt wrong. Her tone carried an unfamiliar quality his species had no word for: irony. Your credentials are incomplete, Kalen stated, extending a translucent tendril toward her. Form 7843B requires 3 additional signatures and a genetic verification stamp. You have 14 standard hours to comply, or your world will be placed in provisional status. Dr. Cross smiled. It wasn't the polite acknowledgement of error he expected. It was something else entirely. Actually, Ambassador, I don't think I will, she said pleasantly. Would you like some coffee while we discuss why? Kalen's neural cluster froze. In 12,000 years of collective history across 1 million worlds, no one had ever responded to an official directive with a simple refusal. The concept didn't exist in any of the 2,000 languages he'd mastered. Over the following weeks, Kalen documented his observations with growing alarm. Humans had laws, yes, thousands of them, but they treated them as suggestions rather than absolutes. They had traffic regulations they ignored when convenient. They had taxation systems riddled with loopholes they exploited shamelessly. They had entire legal professions dedicated to finding creative ways around established rules. It's called civil disobedience, Dr. Cross explained one afternoon, as they watched protesters march past the embassy with colorful signs opposing some regulation Kalen had already forgotten. When a law is unjust, we have a moral obligation to break it. But who determines what is unjust? Kalen asked, genuinely baffled. We do, she said simply. Individual conscience. We call it democracy, Ambassador. Messy, inefficient, and absolutely necessary. Kalen filed his first report to the Compliance Bureau. Humanity presents a fundamental threat to collective harmony. Recommend immediate corrective measures. The response came swiftly. Integration protocols authorized. Humanity will learn compliance within 2 standard years. Kalen believed them. He had no idea humans had been preparing for this moment since first contact, studying the collective's weaknesses with the same intensity they'd once applied to splitting atoms and mapping genomes. The greatest bureaucracy in galactic history was about to learn a very human lesson. Rules only work when people choose to follow them. The Malicious Compliance Initiative. Commander Thrace Kellyan studied the collective's integration manual from her office in Geneva. 7,000 pages. 12,000 regulations. Every aspect of human life, from agricultural yields to artistic expression, now subject to galactic oversight. She smiled and opened a secure channel to her team. Gentlemen, ladies, and variations thereof, she began, addressing the 50 brightest minds Earth had to offer. We've just been handed 7,000 pages of exploitable material. I want every loophole, every contradiction, every ambiguous clause identified by morning. We're going to teach the collective the most dangerous human skill, letter of the law compliance. Dr. Marcus Joe, legal theorist, spoke first. Regulation 3341 requires all agricultural production to be reported in standard yield units. They've defined SYUs as the mass of edible product per cultivated area. But the definition doesn't specify whether mass is measured wet or dry, before or after processing. Beautiful, Thrace said. What else? Section 891 on artistic expression, added Yuki Tanaka, cultural analyst. It permits cultural works that align with collective values. But there's no enforcement mechanism, no review board, no penalty structure. It's completely toothless. The list grew. Transportation regulations that could be satisfied by moving goods 1 meter per hour. Educational requirements met by courses teaching basic arithmetic to adults. environmental protection standards that could be fulfilled by designating a single square meter as a protected zone. They've never dealt with deliberate non-cooperation, Thrace realized. Their entire system assumes good faith compliance. We're going to drown them in paperwork and technicalities. The first test came 3 weeks later. Ambassador Vross arrived at a factory in Mumbai, conducting a surprise inspection to verify compliance with Industrial Production Statute 4429. The factory manager, Priya Sharma, greeted him with meticulous politeness. "Ambassador, we've been expecting random inspections. All our documentation is in perfect order." She handed him a data crystal containing 17,000 pages of production reports, maintenance logs and worker schedules, exactly as required by statute. Every field filled out. Every signature present. Kalen spent 3 days reviewing the documentation. It was flawless. It was also completely useless. The reports detailed the production of industrial components, without specifying what they were. Worker schedules showed employees logging exactly 40 hours per week, but job descriptions were listed simply as various tasks. Maintenance logs recorded servicing equipment identified only by serial numbers that didn't correspond to any known inventory system. "This is inadequate," Kalen declared. "In what way?" Priya asked innocently. "Every required field has been completed according to the statute specifications. The information is not useful for oversight purposes." "The statute doesn't require usefulness, Ambassador. It requires completion of specified forms with specified information in specified formats. We've met every requirement." Kalen returned to his embassy and immediately filed an amendment request to close the loophole. Within hours, Earth's legal team had identified 47 new loopholes the amendment inadvertently created. The pattern repeated across every sector. Transportation companies complied with vehicle registration by registering bicycles as heavy transport. Educational institutions satisfied curriculum requirements by teaching kindergarten content to university students. Artists produced technically compliant work that subtly mocked collective values. The Compliance Bureau's amendment queue grew to 10,000 pending items. Each fix created new problems. The bureaucracy that had smoothly administered 1,000,000 worlds for 12 millennia began to groan under the weight of Earth's creative interpretation of its own rules. "They're doing this deliberately," Kalen reported to his superiors. "They're weaponizing compliance itself." The response was predictable: increase oversight. Deploy additional auditors. Tighten regulations. Commander Kellyan smiled when she received the news. The collective was reacting exactly as predicted. They were trying to solve a cultural problem with more bureaucracy. It would be their downfall. The strike that wasn't. 6 months into integration, Kalen thought he'd seen everything humans could throw at his carefully ordered universe. He was wrong. The first sign came from the manufacturing district in Sao Paulo. Production numbers had been adequate. Not exceptional, not deficient, but precisely at the minimum required threshold. Every single day. Every single facility. Across the entire planet. "They're implementing a work slowdown," his deputy Vorlin reported. Labor Statute 7723 requires reasonable effort from workers. They're providing exactly that, no more no less. "Arrest the instigators," Kalen ordered. "Work stoppages violate Harmony Protocol 12. There are no instigators, sir. There is no stoppage. No one has refused to work. No one has violated any regulation. They're simply working at precisely the minimum pace the statute allows." Kalen traveled to a factory in person. Workers moved with deliberate care, following every safety protocol to the letter. A welder took 3 hours to complete a joint that previously required 30 minutes. When questioned, she pulled up the regulation mandating specific cooling times between welds, minimum inspection periods, and mandatory documentation for each step. "I'm following the rules," she said calmly. "Would you prefer I violated safety statutes?" Across Earth, the same scene repeated. Bureaucrats processed permits at the exact speed regulations allowed, no faster. Transport drivers observed every traffic law with meticulous precision, reducing delivery efficiency by 70%. Teachers covered exactly the material specified in educational guidelines, ignoring enrichment content that wasn't technically required. Dr. Cross called it a work-to-rule action. Kalen called it terrorism without violence. The Compliance Bureau called an emergency session. Supreme Coordinator, Kalen addressed the holographic assembly of the collective's highest authorities. Earth's productivity has dropped to 40% of predicted levels. Not through strikes or sabotage, but through perfect compliance with our own regulations. Supreme Coordinator Thelen, whose species had evolved in methane seas and communicated through bioluminescence, pulsed with confusion. How can perfect compliance be a problem? Because our regulations were designed for species that want to follow them efficiently, Kalen explained. Humans are following them to deliberately create inefficiency. They've turned our entire legal framework into a weapon. Then we must create regulations requiring efficiency, Thelen declared. We tried, Coordinator. Humans immediately demanded precise definitions of efficiency. When we provided them, they identified 17 methods to meet the letter of the definition while violating its spirit. When we closed those loopholes, they found 34 more. The assembly fell silent, or its equivalent across dozens of species. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Compliance Bureau had encountered a problem it couldn't solve with more regulations. Meanwhile, in Geneva, Commander Kellyan received reports from her teams embedded across Earth's infrastructure. Phase 2 is proceeding as planned. The collective's attempting to regulate efficiency itself now. That'll keep them busy for months. And Phase 3? Asked Dr. Cross, who joined the strategic planning session. We teach the other species what we've learned. If one world can paralyze the collective through creative compliance, imagine what a million worlds could do. Dr. Cross smiled. You're planning a rebellion. Not a rebellion, Kellyan corrected. An education. We're going to teach the galaxy's most powerful empire something humans learned thousands of years ago. Authority without consent is just tyranny with paperwork. She pulled up a star map, highlighting systems along Earth's major trade routes. We start with the Kelvari Commonwealth. They've been chafing under collective regulations for decades. Then the VRYNN Technocracy, the Salish Union, and the Torvan Coalition. We won't need armies or weapons. Just lawyers and bureaucrats, Dr. Cross finished. The universe's most dangerous weapons. Now you're getting it, Kellyan said. Let's teach a million worlds how to say no. The Kelvari Awakening. Ambassador Zira of Kelvar III had served as her world's liaison to the collective for 30 years. In that time she'd filed 10,000 compliance reports, attended 6,000 mandatory briefings, and memorized 400 separate regulatory frameworks. She'd been a model citizen of the harmonious collective. Then she met Dr. Sienna Cross. Your efficiency reports are impressive, Sienna said, reviewing Zira's documentation over tea in the Kelvari embassy. The gesture itself was unusual. Collective representatives didn't socialize informally. 97% compliance across all sectors. Your world should be proud. We do our duty, Zira replied, her feathered crest flattening in what humans had learned to recognize as Kelvari discomfort. But are you happy? The question hung in the air like a foreign concept. Zira's translator implant struggled with it. Happiness wasn't a compliance metric. I don't understand, Zira admitted. Let me show you something. Sienna pulled up a document. This is Earth's response to Collective Agricultural Directive 8842. Notice anything unusual? Zira studied the report. It was technically compliant but rendered the directive meaningless through creative interpretation. This is deliberate obstruction. It's called civil disobedience. When laws are unjust, we have not just the right but the obligation to resist them. Within the system, using their own rules against them. But the collective's laws are absolute. They maintain harmony across a million worlds. Do they? Or do they maintain control? Sienna leaned forward. Tell me, Ambassador. When was the last time your people decided their own agricultural policy? When did they choose their educational curriculum? Their trade relationships? Their cultural practices? Zira's crest rippled. Uncertainty, recognition, something close to anger. That's not how the collective works. Central planning ensures optimal outcomes for all species. Optimal for whom? Tell me about Kelvar's traditional music. The regulation requiring all public performances to align with collective aesthetic standards. How has that affected your culture? The memory hit Zira like a physical blow. Her grandmother had been a renowned performer of dawn songs, the complex vocalizations Kelvari had created to greet their planet's twin suns. The art form had been classified as non-compliant with auditory harmony standards 40 years ago. It existed now only in illegal recordings and whispered memories. I see it in your expression, Sienna said gently. You've lost something precious, haven't you? And you've been told it was for the greater good. What would you have us do? Zira asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rebel? The collective has enforcement fleets that could reduce Kelvar to dust. Not rebellion. Education. Sienna handed her another document. This is a training manual. It teaches something humans call malicious compliance, following rules so precisely that they become unenforceable. We're sharing it with every species willing to learn. Over the following weeks, Zira studied the manual. She learned about work-to-rule actions, regulatory capture, bureaucratic resistance. She discovered that the collective's greatest strength, its vast regulatory framework, could be its greatest weakness when subjected to deliberate, systematic non-cooperation. She also began to notice things she'd missed before. How Kelvari workers moved with mechanical efficiency but no joy. How children learned facts but never questioned. How every aspect of life had been optimized for productivity but stripped of meaning. 3 months later, Kelvar 3 filed its agricultural reports. Technically perfect. Practically useless. Production metrics met minimum standards. Worker satisfaction surveys showed responses hovering at exactly the median value. Every single data point fell within acceptable ranges while providing no useful information whatsoever. When collective auditors arrived, they found factories running at regulation-mandated efficiency with regulation-mandated safety protocols followed to the letter. Nothing was wrong. Nothing was right. The entire system had entered a state of productive paralysis. And in the underground clubs of Kelvar's capital city, for the first time in 40 years, dawn songs echoed through the streets. Ambassador Kalen Vross received the reports with growing horror. It's spreading. Earth has infected Kelvar, and now Kelvar is teaching the VRWNN. The entire third quadrant is experiencing compliance degradation. Infected, Dr. Cross repeated when he confronted her. You speak as if freedom were a disease. It is disorder. It is chaos. It will destroy everything the collective has built. Good, Sienna said simply. Maybe it's time to build something better. The Council's dilemma. The Supreme Council chamber floated in the void between stars, a massive construct where the collective's 17 founding species gathered to address existential threats. It had been convened only 12 times in 12,000 years. This was the 13th. Order, Supreme Coordinator Thelen commanded, their bioluminescence dimming to signal the session's start. We face an unprecedented crisis. Compliance ratings have fallen below 70% across 400 systems. The decline is accelerating. Ambassador Kalen presented his findings to the assembled powers. The contagion originated with humanity but has evolved beyond simple imitation. Each species adapts the methodology to their own strengths. The VRWNN used technical expertise to identify regulatory contradictions. The Salish employ collective action to create system-wide slowdowns. The Torvan have weaponized their bureaucratic structures against us. We could deploy enforcement protocols, suggested Admiral Vrexus of the Enforcement Corps, their multiple limbs gesturing aggressively. Make examples of the worst offenders. To what end? Kalen asked. We can't imprison entire worlds for following our own regulations. They're not violating laws, they're following them in ways that make governance impossible. Then we revise the regulations, Thelen said. Close every loophole. Create enforcement mechanisms with teeth. We've tried, Coordinator. For every regulation we tighten, they find 7 new workarounds. Earth alone has submitted 100,000 amendment requests, each designed to create more bureaucratic overhead. The Compliance Bureau is drowning in paperwork. Scholar Nethrix, eldest of the collective's founders, spoke for the first time in decades. Their crystalline form refracted the chamber's light into complex patterns. Perhaps we are asking the wrong question. Not how to restore compliance but why it has been lost. Because humans taught them rebellion, Vrexus growled. No, Nethrix replied. Humans taught them agency. There is a difference. The chamber erupted in overlapping translations as 17 species debated simultaneously. Thelen's light flared for silence. Scholar, please elaborate. The collective was founded to prevent chaos, Nethrix explained. But in our pursuit of order, we created stagnation. We optimized efficiency but eliminated innovation. We enforced harmony but destroyed diversity. Humans showed other species what they already suspected, that perfect compliance requires the surrender of everything that makes existence meaningful. Are you suggesting we abandon 12,000 years of stability? Thelen demanded. I am suggesting that stability without growth is death. The collective has achieved perfect order by becoming perfectly static. Humans are chaotic, inefficient, and contradictory, but they are also creative, adaptive, and alive in ways we have forgotten. Kalen found himself nodding despite his better judgment. He thought of Dr. Cross, of her easy defiance and infectious enthusiasm. He thought of the protesters with their colorful signs, the factory workers deliberately following safety regulations to absurd extremes, the artists creating technically compliant work that mocked everything the collective stood for. They were infuriating. They were also fascinating. "What do you propose?" he asked Nethrix. "Dialogue. Not as enforcers to subjects, but as one civilization to another. Learn from humanity instead of attempting to control them. They have something we lost millennia ago, the ability to question authority, including their own." "This is madness," Vrexus protested. "The collective cannot negotiate with rebels." "They are not rebels," Nethrix corrected gently. "They are citizens who refuse to be subjects. There is a distinction." The vote was closer than anyone expected. 8 species in favor of dialogue. 7 opposed. 2 abstentions. For the first time in collective history, a major policy decision had been contested. Humans, Kalen thought, had taught the collective something after all. Not civil disobedience exactly, but something deeper. The idea that perfect harmony might not be worth the price of total submission. "Ambassador Vross," Thelen said, "you will return to Earth. Not as an enforcer but as, what do humans call it?" "A diplomat," Kalen supplied. "Someone who listens as well as directs." "Yes. Learn from them, Kalen. Teach them to work within the system rather than against it." But more importantly, Thelen's light pulsed with an emotion Kalen had never seen from the coordinator: uncertainty. Learn whether the system itself is worth preserving. Kalen departed for Earth knowing his mission had fundamentally changed. He was no longer there to enforce compliance. He was there to negotiate the future of galactic civilization itself. And if that future required dismantling everything the collective had built, well, perhaps humans would teach him how to do that too. The new compact. Dr. Sienna Cross didn't recognize the being who entered her office. Kalen Vross had always carried himself with rigid formality, his crystalline form reflecting absolute certainty. The ambassador who settled into the chair across from her seemed softer somehow, more translucent. "No compliance reports today?" she asked, offering tea. He accepted, another first. "I've been authorized to negotiate," Kalen said. "The Council wishes to explore alternative governance structures." "Alternative, meaning anything but what you've been doing for 12,000 years?" "Essentially, yes." He sipped the tea, his form rippling with what she'd learned to recognize as amusement. "You've broken our system, Dr. Cross. Thoroughly and completely. Now we need you to help us build something better. And if we refuse? Then the collective will collapse within a decade. Compliance has fallen to 62% across all systems. We can no longer govern effectively. But more than that." He paused and Sienna saw something remarkable in his expression. "Vulnerability. We shouldn't." Scholar Nethrix was right. "We achieved stability by killing everything that makes civilization worth having." Commander Kellyan joined them, along with representatives from Kelver, Vieranen, Salesh, and a dozen other worlds that had embraced humanity's lessons. The conference room in Geneva had never held so many species. "Let's establish ground rules," Kellyan began. "First, no single species dictates policy to others. Second, regulations require consent from those they govern. Third, enforcement mechanisms must be proportional and subject to appeal." "This will be chaos," Kalen protested reflexively, then caught himself. "Apologies. Old habits." "It will be messy," Ambassador Zira of Kelver agreed. "But messiness is not the same as chaos. Humans have proven that democratic systems, while inefficient, are remarkably resilient." The negotiations lasted 3 months. The collective's representatives struggled with concepts like loyal opposition, civil liberties, and cultural autonomy. Humans struggled with the collective's insistence on baseline standards for rights and protections. "You want standardized rules for allowing non-standardization," Dr. Marcus Jo observed during one particularly circular debate. "That's beautifully paradoxical." "It's the only way both systems can coexist," Kalen replied. "The collective cannot abandon all oversight. Some regulations genuinely prevent suffering and maintain peace. But we must distinguish between necessary coordination and arbitrary control." Slowly, painfully, a framework emerged. The Galactic Compact, they called it, a constitution for 1,000,000 worlds that preserved diversity while preventing chaos. Local governance within broad parameters. Cultural autonomy with protections against genocide and exploitation. Economic coordination without centralized control. Article 7, Sienna read aloud. "No regulation shall be enforced without demonstrated consent of affected populations, measured through representative mechanisms appropriate to each species' social structure. That's going to drive your compliance bureau insane. We're disbanding the compliance bureau, Kalen said quietly. Or rather, transforming it. The new Coordination Council will facilitate cooperation rather than enforce obedience. You're giving up power voluntarily, Commander Kellyan observed. That's remarkably brave. We're acknowledging what you proved, that we never truly had power, only the illusion of it. Authority without consent is just tyranny waiting for the right spark to ignite resistance. The compact was presented to the Supreme Council 6 months after Kalen's return to Earth. The debate lasted weeks. Admiral Vrexus and the hardliners fought every provision, warning of dissolution and disaster. Scholar Nethrix spoke in support. We built the collective to prevent the horrors of the Chaos Wars. But in our fear of conflict, we created stagnation. Humans remind us that peace is not the absence of disagreement, it is the presence of mechanisms to resolve disagreement without violence. The vote was 13-4 in favor. The harmonious collective, as it had existed for 12 millennia, officially dissolved. The Galactic Compact took its place. Across a million worlds, species began the chaotic, messy, beautiful work of governing themselves. Some succeeded brilliantly. Some struggled. Some failed and had to try again. But they all had something they'd lacked before: choice. What will you do now? Kalen asked Sienna as they watched the signing ceremony broadcast across the galaxy. Oh, make sure nobody gets too comfortable with the new system. Democracy requires constant vigilance against authority, even democratic authority. You're going to teach civil disobedience to the compact itself? Of course. Power always trends toward consolidation. Someone has to push back. She smiled. Besides, you'll need human consultants to help manage the chaos we've unleashed. Turns out our experience with productive dysfunction is valuable. Kalen's form rippled with laughter, a sound his species had rarely made in 12,000 years of perfect compliance. The galaxy will never be the same. That's the idea, Sienna said. Welcome to democracy, Ambassador. It's going to be a hell of a ride. The lesson endures. 20 years after the signing of the Galactic Compact, Kalen Vross found himself teaching at the newly established Academy of Governance on Kelvor 3. His students, young beings from 200 different species, sat in an amphitheater that would have given his younger self heart palpitations. No assigned seating. No mandatory attendance. No standardized curriculum. Pure chaos. Absolutely wonderful. Today we discuss the compliance crisis, he began, projecting images of the harmonious collective's final years. Can anyone identify the fundamental error in the old system? A young VRYNN raised 3 of their 7 manipulator arms. Professor, the collective assumed obedience was natural. Humans proved it was a choice. Correct but incomplete. Alara? He gestured to a human student from Earth's African Union. The collective confused control with cooperation, she said. They built a system that couldn't distinguish between maintaining order and suppressing freedom. When species finally recognized the distinction, the whole structure collapsed. Excellent. Now, who can tell me why the compact succeeded where the collective failed? Ambassador Zira entered the classroom, her feathered crest now shot through with silver. She'd become the Academy's chancellor after retiring from diplomatic service. May I, Professor Vross? She addressed the students. The compact succeeded because it embraced a very human truth. Good governance requires constant negotiation between authority and liberty. We no longer seek perfect order. We seek sustainable balance. Isn't that inefficient? Asked a Salish student, their chitinous plates clicking skeptically. Extremely, Zira agreed. But efficiency without adaptability is fragility. The collective was magnificently efficient right up until it shattered. The compact is messy, contentious, and frequently frustrating, but it's also resilient, creative, and responsive to change. Speaking of frustration, Kalen added with what his students recognized as humor, let's discuss the latest amendment proposal. Article 47 regarding trade coordination. The Torvan Coalition has submitted modifications that. The classroom erupted in groans. Amendment proposals had become the bane of every governance student's existence. They were complex, contradictory, and required understanding 17 different legal frameworks. They were also absolutely essential. That evening, Kalen met Dr. Sienna Cross at a cafe overlooking Kelvor's twin moons. She'd aged gracefully, her hair now white but her eyes still bright with mischief. How goes the education of the galaxy's future leaders? She asked. Slower than I'd like. They still think in terms of optimal solutions rather than acceptable compromises. But they're learning. He paused. We're all learning. Problems? The VRWNN technocracy is threatening to withdraw from the compact if the new data sharing protocols pass. The Salish Union wants stronger environmental enforcement. Earth's Pacific Coalition is demanding that cultural protection statutes be expanded. 36 species are fighting over jurisdiction in the Antares sector. Sienna smiled. Sounds like democracy is working perfectly. This is what success looks like? Kalen asked, though his form had taken on the warm translucence that indicated contentment. Messy, contentious, constantly renegotiating the terms of cooperation? Yes. That's exactly what success looks like. The collective never had these problems because it never allowed disagreement. The compact has them constantly because disagreement is how we prevent stagnation. I miss the certainty sometimes, Kalen admitted. Knowing exactly what was right, what was required, what would happen next. But you don't miss the emptiness, do you? The sense that you were maintaining a machine rather than nurturing a civilization. No, he said after a long pause. I don't miss that at all. They sat in comfortable silence, watching ships come and go from Kelver's orbital platforms. Traders from 1,000 worlds, carrying goods and ideas and arguments across the galaxy. No longer subject to centralized control, no longer following regulations designed to create uniformity. Just citizens of a vast, chaotic, beautiful experiment in self-governance. There's talk of nominating me for the Coordination Council, Kalen said, as the representative for former collective officials who've adapted to the new system. Will you accept? I think so. Someone needs to remind the young radicals that not all structure is oppression, that coordination doesn't equal control. Just as someone, he gestured to Sienna, needs to remind the old bureaucrats that efficiency isn't the highest value. The eternal dance, Sienna said. Authority and liberty, structure and freedom, order and chaos. Humans didn't invent that tension. We just learned to embrace it rather than trying to eliminate one side. And taught the rest of us to do the same, Kalen finished. Sometimes I wonder what the collective's founders would think if they saw what we've become. Scholar Nethrix knew, Sienna replied. That's why they supported the change. They remembered what the collective was founded to preserve, not order for its own sake but the possibility of flourishing. Somewhere along the way the means became the end. A group of students passed by the cafe, arguing animatedly about constitutional theory. Kalen recognized several from his class. They noticed him and waved, their various appendages creating a comical display of interspecies greeting. They'll do better than we did, he said. They're learning from our mistakes rather than repeating them. And they'll make new mistakes, Sienna added, which their students will learn from in turn. That's how this works, Kalen. No perfect system, just constant improvement through trial and error. Civil disobedience as evolutionary strategy, he mused. Questioning authority as a survival mechanism. Only humans would build a civilization on deliberate imperfection. Not anymore, Sienna said, gesturing at the diverse crowds filling the streets. The galaxy learned the lesson. They governed 1,000,000 worlds through compliance. We taught them something better. Governance through consent, order through cooperation, peace through continuous negotiation. And when the system becomes too rigid again? Kalen asked. Sienna's smile turned mischievous. Then someone will teach the galaxy civil disobedience all over again. That's the beautiful thing about freedom, Ambassador. Once you've tasted it, you never forget the flavor. Kalen raised his glass in a gesture he'd learned from humans. To imperfect systems and the imperfect beings who make them work. To civil disobedience, Sienna countered, clinking her glass against his. May it always keep authority honest. Above them, ships continued their eternal dance across the stars. 1,000,000 worlds, each choosing its own path, each contributing to the chaotic symphony of galactic civilization. No longer governed by the rigid harmonies of the collective, but by the improvised jazz of democratic cooperation. Messy, inefficient, contentious, human, and absolutely glorious,